right. So, my final topic for platforms and ecosystems is fixing discrimination in online marketplaces. This was written by Ray Fisman and Michael Luca. So, for my final presentation, we take a different turn and we look into the discrimination that's happening in the online space and how is it happening and what can we do to prevent it. So it's going to be, as I said, a short presentation because one, there hasn't been a lot of efforts done to prevent online discrimination in the marketplace, unfortunately. But here, basically, our authors provided a framework for companies that want to design and manage a marketplace while minimizing the discrimination. So, actually, first, I want to clear yung their focus for the discrimination here is more on the gender and racial discrimination that's happening in the online marketplace. Later, we'll discuss more of that. So, first, I'd like to begin with how it started. So, the emergence of digital discrimination. So, yung ano natin, mga first generation of online marketplaces, it wasn't as easy to discriminate yung mga sellers. Think of it as Amazon and eBay. 'Di ba, during that time, you just have a seller, you don't see anything. It could be a random name, username that's provided by the seller and also the buyer. They could use a random name as well. And same with Amazon. They can finish an entire transaction without any other information about the gender or the identity of the buyer and the seller. So hence, there's no discrimination that's happening. And but the problem here is that one side of the market tended not to know things the other side didn't. So, syempre, it's natural for any businesses, even yung mga physical stores. But it's harder for online platforms because one, you can't hold the product. You just have to depend on what the seller is saying or what the buyer is saying. They can say that um the example in the paper was like, for example, a baseball. um I guess in the United States it's very popular item no sa mga online sellers. They could say that this baseball is in good condition, but of course that's ano 'di ba subjective. But because the seller says it, the buyer has no way of knowing if the seller is telling the truth until he or she actually buys the product. So this was the issue in the marketplace at that time. And syempre, because it's online, there were no established brands yet. So um, over time, we saw the value of user feedbacks and reviews. And doon natin nalaman na parang it's valuable to know some information about who are buying your products. Are these reviews real or are they dependable? So doon na they started capturing or they started using the information from the buyers and the sellers to establish yung mga brands or yung mga sellers and the buyers hanggang sa it developed na into providing yung photo, iba even now may photos na and may names and yun on the websites of services they now have discretion over who they want to do business with. Wait. So yun sometimes unfortunately parang even with just the name, they can already discriminate. So an example here is Airbnb. So when a renter is browsing the platform for any listing, any property, so he or they will see the descriptions and the pictures of the property and also the picture and the name of the host. And likewise, the host can see the name and the picture of the potential tenant before they can accept or reject the booking. So there was a study in the United States, so that the conclusion was requests with black sounding names were 16% less likely to be accepted than those with white sounding names. So most of the hosts sa Airbnb, they decline, unfortunately, black sounding profile. Yung mga yun din, they're also the same hosts that sometimes had never hosted a black guest. And yun, apparent na yung discrimination on the base of race. So, it is given that different different platforms have different design features, even if they are in the same industry. But their design will dictate its vulnerability to discrimination. So, for example, Uber and Lyft, this is in the United States. In the simple manner of just deciding to post the pictures of the riders and the drivers, si Uber doesn't provide the driver photos, pero si Lyft nagpo-provide siya. So, si Uber, by not including the picture, they are less vulnerable to discriminations by drivers. So, another vacation rental marketplace that is a competitor of Airbnb is HomeAway. HomeAway also do not display the host photos, only the property. So until the transaction is complete, saka lang nila makikita yung information about the host. Unlike sa Airbnb, that all the photos are presented already. So companies also have varying approaches to investigate possible discrimination and taking remedial action. Kasi it's not enough that you're able to identify that there's discrimination happening in your business, but you also have to take action against it. So for example, eBay, they worked with a team of social psychologists to explore whether male sellers get higher prices than female sellers for similar items. And as it turns out, they do. So that's only eBay. There's been very little known efforts to address discrimination from other online marketplaces. So, the purpose of the article was to provide a framework for companies who are intentional in designing and managing a marketplace while minimizing discrimination. So, the focus here, as I said, is mostly about racial and gender discrimination. So first is about the principles of market designs for platforms. So first, the first principle is don't ignore the potential for discrimination. So to do this, platforms should start with more careful tracking. So think of it like as a report or an audit on the race and gender of users and the success of each group to the on the platform. So because they already have this data, right? And they could continuously have a study with the data that they have if there is discrimination happening in their business. And this will help them reveal and confront any issues that they see on the platform. Another example is again Airbnb. They can report on the acceptance rates of guests broken out by factors such as race and gender. Like the one that mentioned before is this host declining um guests based on their names or based on their gender. So they can already address it. And the advice is to make the information public so that it will raise awareness and keep the pressure on the companies to address these issues. So the second principle is maintain an experimental mindset. So platforms should test different design choices to conform which would influence the extent of the discrimination. So for example, si Airbnb again, they experimented they should experiment pala. They have not done this in removing host photos from its search results page to explore the effects on booking outcomes. Kasi right now they already have it. Anong mangyayari if they remove it? Will they the guests from the guests and the host, right? Will they will it make any difference at all? Baka mamaya this is only an assumption of discrimination. Hindi pala. So yun yung that was the second principle that was being advised here in this framework. They should continue to experiment kasi it's not enough that you're building, you're expanding. I guess it's also more like a social responsibility to make sure that your business supports yung preventing discrimination. And then next is ito naman more on the design choices for the platforms which are more likely to affect the discrimination. So there are four questions here. One, are you providing too much information? So in many cases, the simplest, most effective change a platform can make is to withhold potentially sensitive user information, again, such as gender and race, until after the transaction has been agreed to. So this is already done by Amazon and eBay. But for some firms, it is unacceptable to remove photos or names. So, syempre, hindi ko. I can't think of ano pa ha. For example, si Facebook. Hindi naman nila pwedeng hindi, they can't not show the the name and the photo of the person because that's the nature of the social media, right? But kita naman natin yung effect, medyo 'di ba, talamak yung widespread yung discrimination in that platform. So you already know that's wrong. Pero for some businesses that can prevent it, like yun nga, yung examples dito, si Grab, si Uber, or sila Amazon, eBay, they have the option to reduce the information to prevent yung gender discrimination. So, aside from choosing what to reveal, businesses must also consider how salient to make it. So, dito naman, according to studies, it said that a customer is influenced not only by the information he sees, but which information is prominent. So, I remember an example here is, for example, you're being asked to read a document, and then by the end of the document, that's where you're intended to sign. But if, for example, you put that signature on the top, dun mo dun mo pa lang makikita it's beside your name. So if parang it's more prominent, you're less likely to ignore it because it's already there. So yun. So the second one is, could you further automate the transaction process? So example, si Uber. Um, Without seeing the name or the photo of the driver, you will confirm the transaction. If the rider happens to discriminate, he or she can cancel. But it could be a hassle, it could incur costs. So um mas maiiwasan. It could prevent discrimination because who would want to book again, lalo na if peak hours mahirap mag-book. So with this design, Uber was able to see by just choosing this design for their application, they were able to prevent or minimize the discrimination in their business. Because they could have done the opposite, right? They could have displayed it, and then the riders can choose if they want this driver or not. Or same way, the driver can also choose if they want to discriminate the riders or not. But with just that simple design, they were able to prevent it. And another example here is again Airbnb, the instant booking option of Airbnb. So this option, the host doesn't need to approve the the renter. With the instant booking, if the renter decides to choose this property, walang choice si host because ano na siya, they agreed to an instant booking confirmation. So, what Airbnb can do is provide yung instant booking as a default option. Kasi there's also a study, yung power of yung default bias. So whatever is default, it's less likely that someone will change it. So if Airbnb provided the instant booking confirmation as the default, only those who really intend to discriminate will more likely to change yung settings just so they can filter the guests that they would allow on their property. So yun, in this way, they're less likely to discriminate with this automation. So the third one is, could you make discrimination policies more top of the mind? So for some platforms, they bury policies on prohibiting discrimination under the fine print. So by the time the host is ready to accept renters, nakalimutan na nila. Um they have forgotten it along with everything else in the contract. Now, the suggestion is that marketplace present the anti-discrimination policies at a more relevant time. For example, during the actual transaction process, then they would less likely to violate it. So, unless it is a conscious choice na wala na tayong magagawa because they want to discriminate, 'di ba? Pero if, for example, dun sa bago mag-checkout, you're reminded that or you're discriminating ba or not, we have policies against it. So parang mapapaisip ka, ito na pala yung sinasabi nila that is not allowed. Unlike if, kunwari, you're just listing down all the terms and conditions, including the anti-discrimination clause. They most likely haven't read it because they think it's pretty standard. But unconsciously, they are agreeing to it and they're already violating the policies that you should have enforced better. So that's what it's about. So the fourth one, the last one, the question is, should your algorithms be discrimination aware? So we go back to algorithms. So algorithms designers should track how race or gender impacts the user experience and to set explicit objectives to prevent discrimination. So syempre the designer of the algorithm can dictate how the algorithm provides the information if it is already providing suggestions for discrimination. So there was this study again, no, on Google search, that people who search for common African American names generated ads offering to investigate possible arrest records just with the name that they search. Automatic na ang mga top ads na lalabas was about arrest records. So the algorithm decided that based on the name lang that they're searching, it is more likely that an African American compared to a white name will click an ad related to arrests. So after this study was made public, Google tweaked its algorithm to address the problem cited by the study. And yung suggestion here is for more companies to do their own research on their systems to proactively monitor such problems because it doesn't have to take an outsider to look into their system to know that there's a problem. Again, part of their social responsibility. So, in conclusion, we take a lesson from symphony orchestras. This was a good story. I'll try to cut it short. So the story goes that in the mid 60s, less than 10% of the musicians in the big five US orchestras were women. 10% lang. In the 70s and 80s, they had this effort to diversify. And they changed the audition process. So the way they auditioned, they conducted it with a screen or a divider so that they can only be evaluated by their musical ability. They cannot see if the musician is their gender, if it's male or female, or their race is it black or white or Asian. And the results of it was that the increase in the success rate of female musicians by 160%. And without yung gender bias or any bias at all, the orchestra became better because the with the audition they're only based on the musical ability. So this study it provide a glimpse into the discrimination's effect in the online marketplace and the impact of small change in preventing it. So platform designers have the ability to control discrimination, like the in the music orchestra they have the ability to create that divider so that they can prevent the discrimination, which could also be better for the online marketplace. And they can start with the framework provided in this study. That's all.